go. So again, the philosophy and platform of the party. This is part of our political education and community organizing series. We first put this together in 2014. The party, by the way, was started February 21st of 2012. And February 21st, as many of us know, is the day on which Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz was assassinated. So in an effort to demonstrate that even though Malcolm had physically died and physically transitioned, however, his political philosophy and ideology continued to live on through the creation of this independent Black political party. As we all know, Malcolm X was a very strong proponent and advocate of radical, revolutionary, but independent Black politics. Malcolm made it very clear that we could not depend on either the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party in our pursuit of freedom and liberation for ourselves. That we had to develop a basis and a foundation from which to organize and from which to mobilize our people and from which to negotiate when it came time to negotiate the basis of our freedom and liberation. That being said, February 21st, 2012, the party was officially founded. So this was part of our original political education and community organizing series. This particular module, which is the first module, was presented in a PE class, September the 20th of 2014. The content, we cover number one, who we are, why we use the term New African, or why we use the colors red, black, and green as our colors, why we use the Black Panther as the symbol or part of the logo for the party, and what we mean when we say that politics, that everything is political, and we provide a definition. And then we talk about the time is now, then we go over our platform plank by plank, point by point. So basically who we are. We were founded in 2012 by myself, and we were officially launched 2 years later in 2014. We took about 2 years to kind of work out some of the glitches, work on some of the philosophical and some of the ideological direction, and basically develop some consensus as to if this was the right move to make. So we're anti-racist, we're anti-capitalist, and we're anti-imperialist. And we'll talk about what each one of those things means for us as members and as supporters of the NAIP. We're a mass-based political party, and we utilize the best ideas, the ideals, the practices and traditions of previous as well as contemporary movements for freedom and self-group determination. So an idea is just a thought. An ideal is a standard. And of course, you know what practice is. So we try to utilize the best ideas or thoughts, but we also try to utilize the best standards. And we try to make sure that our practice is in line with the things that we talk about. So our practice should reinforce and commensurate our ideas as well as the standards that we hold ourselves to and the standards that we hold other comrades to, whether they belong to our party or not. We also believe in using history as a teaching and learning tool. And so we think it's very important that we utilize the best traditions of previous movements as well as contemporary movements that really represent our people's initiative and our efforts to pursue and to obtain freedom and self, or what we call group determination. When we say we're anti-racist, it means that we are for Black or New African freedom, liberation, and group determination or self-determination. We are not anti-white people. We are anti-white supremacy. We support the struggles of all people for freedom and self-determination. So we don't hate white people because they're white, right? We support the freedom movements and we support the struggles of all people, including white people. There are white people in different parts of this world who have been oppressed. They have been colonized. They have been subjugated to economic injustice and exploitation under capitalism, under imperialism, and under colonial rule. We support their struggles for freedom and liberation as well. And those who no longer fit that situation, but who had to struggle to get their freedom, we support those just struggles and movements for freedom and self-determination as well. We are against white supremacy. And we're going to talk about white supremacy a little later on, because the way that we define white supremacy is perhaps a little different than how some people nowadays call out or define white supremacy. We support the struggles, again, of all people for freedom and self-determination. We are not anti-white people, but we are definitely against white supremacy. and we are for new African or Black freedom, liberation, and self-determination. We're anti-capitalist. Now, capitalism is an economic model and system which enriches and empowers the few owners at the expense of the majority who do the work. Capitalism will empower a few, but leaves the vast majority of people either struggling to pay their bills or poor. Capitalism creates, uses, and manipulates racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural differences between people in order to justify its control and exploitation of people, as well as to take away their natural resources. Capitalist forms of economics also contributes to poverty, extreme economic disparities, crime, mass incarceration, and environmental destruction and poisoning. Genocide and slavery are byproducts of capitalism. So this is kind of like the layout as to why we say we're anti-capitalist. We don't think that capitalism as an economic model and as a social system is a model that's going to help us as Black people to get free and to stay free. Capitalism doesn't work well for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of white people, however, have been tricked and fooled into thinking that capitalism is the best system for them, right? And so that's because of the whole thing with racism and white supremacy. So the white working class oftentimes is tricked or manipulated or brainwashed, or sometimes they just feed into it because there's some material advantages. And so they look the other way, they hold their noses, and they support an economic model, and they support an economic system that they themselves don't really benefit that much from, except in the most superficial way. So capitalism is not an economic model that we advocate, nor is it a model or a system for social order that we support. It will empower a few, but the vast majority of people will continue to struggle. I think now with this pandemic, it's really pulled the cover off of a lot of the fallacies of capitalism as the greatest economic model ever created. We see people now from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the North to the South, struggling to pay their mortgages, to pay their rent, to pay their house, to pay their car notes. Some people are struggling just to keep food on the table. So how is it that we live in this country where we have multi-billionaires, multi-millionaires, but we got vast numbers of folks who are homeless? How can we live in a society that has tremendous amount of wealth, but we have these huge disparities in terms of income, as well as disparities in wealth? Again, two different things: income, wealth. Huge income disparities, but also tremendous wealth disparities here within the United States of America. Income is the money that you make. If you got a job, you got a business, after you deal with your expenses and you pay your taxes, that's your income. Your wealth is the stuff that you've been able to accumulate, that you can pass on, and that can generate additional income and revenue for you. Most Black folks in this country don't have wealth. Many of us have some type of income, and the income that we have oftentimes is not sufficient enough to allow us to pay our bills and to have the most decent things in life that we really deserve. Many of us struggle paycheck to paycheck, and many of us struggle with issues around paying rent, paying mortgage, or even issues around healthcare, as far as being able to pay the bills. So, anti-capitalism, anti-capitalist, this is one of the main mantras of our party, and we stand by it firmly. We're anti-imperialist, and imperialism and capitalism are basically connected. Think of capitalism as exploitation at home. Think of imperialism as exploitation abroad. So imperialism is the cultural, the economic, political, and military domination of a people in a country and or nation by another. Imperialism can be direct, such as colonialism, whereas the dominant nation invades, conquers, and takes over the people and resources of the dominated country. Under colonialism, the imperialist country creates and encourages settlements of the conquered people's land by the invading peoples. They implement their own administration and claim the conquered people and their resources. Imperial nations feed off of the people and resources of the colony. Now think about that for a moment. If we look at this particular country, the United States of America, the United States of America, once upon a time, was a colony of Great Britain. And then it broke away from Great Britain. It declared itself an independent nation. It expanded from the East Coast, right? And it expanded westwardly. It committed genocide against the indigenous people who were living here. It confiscated their land, stole their land, it moved further south and it waged wars of imperial conquest against the people to the south, namely the Mexicano people. It stole their land as well, committed genocide against those people to a certain degree as well. So if you look at what happens with capitalism as it developed here within the United States, the seeds of US imperialism are based on how this country came to be. And it's based on colonial conquest, is based on a settler colonial type of structure where you had the Europeans, they came from Europe, they settled into a land that wasn't their land. At some point, they had trade relationships with the people who were here, the indigenous people, but then they took the trade relationships and used the trade relationships as a vehicle to commit genocide against the people and to take their land. And to later on, those people who survived that, talking about the indigenous people, they were rounded up and put on reservations, right? So if you look at colonialism within the United States, and then you look at colonialism abroad. So that's what it means when we say that we're anti-imperialist. Think about what was done to the indigenous people here and project that to what happens to people in other parts of the world in the name of freedom, in the name of democracy, where the United States will go to some other country and orchestrate a coup, or go to some other country, or send forces to some other country, or support some forces within a country, right, to overthrow the legitimate leadership so United States business interests can move in and take over those people's resources. That's what imperialism does. So we talked about colonialism. Let's talk about neocolonialism. Under neocolonialism, imperialism grants symbolic political freedom, like puppet leadership in a superficial constitution and government leaders, but it continues to control both the economy as well as the military. Under more contemporary forms of imperialism, imperialist nations exercise control through creating long-term debt. They use institutions like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank. And between the IMF, the World Bank, and the dominant countries, mostly white and European, they control the developing countries, which are mostly African, Asian, Caribbean, Central, and South American. And also, last but not least, this is very important because this is some of the stuff that we see and that we have witnessed in more contemporary times. When we look at the situation with Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, or the situation up in Iraq, with Saddam Hussein. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily support the politics of, say, Saddam Hussein, but he was the leader of a sovereign nation. So when you look at contemporary forms of imperialism, they also create false crises and enemies in order to justify war, assassination, social destabilization, regime change, market penetration, and the seizure of industrial and economic assets. Now, what do we mean when we say market penetration? Well, capitalism is an economic model in order to enrich those who are on top. It's always looking for new markets. And when we say looking for new markets, it's always looking for a new group of people to sell goods and services to, or a new group of people whose labor it can exploit, or a new group of people whose resources it can conquer, right, and control. And so when you deal with contemporary manifestations of imperialism, one of the things that they're always doing is looking for new markets. They got to feed that pig, and if it means orchestrating some type of assassination or some type of coup within a country that has some resources that it wants, and that's what they will do. And they can create false crises. They can claim that someone has, for example, in the case of Saddam Hussein, they can claim that someone has so-called weapons of mass destruction. And then they collaborate with the media, and the media creates all the hype. And then they basically dupe the American people into believing the hype. And then that gives them the pretext or the justification for intervening in this country's affairs and to find a way to usurp the leadership, to assassinate the leaders, to create civil war and unrest. And then in the name of protecting American interests, or in the name of some vague definition of democracy and freedom, they will intervene and take over that country's resources, right? So that provides an opportunity for people to expand into new markets. That provides an opportunity for United States business interests to expand into this country and to create new goods and services that perhaps these people had never heard of. So now here it is, you got a group of people that never heard of McDonald's or Burger King, and now 2 years later, everybody's eating McDonald's and Burger Kings because you got McDonald's franchises all around the country. That's a real simplistic version of what could happen. But the most important thing to understand is that imperialism nowadays is much more sophisticated than it used to be. So nowadays, you really won't see too much of the US so-called gunboat diplomacy, where they just send a whole bunch of Marines and they invade somebody's shore and they just take over the businesses and kill the leaders and all that other stuff up front. Nowadays, they are much more sophisticated. They try to get the American people through colluding with the media to buy into this notion that it's in the best interest for the United States to invade somebody's country, to usurp their leadership, to dismantle this country's sovereignty, and to install puppet leadership and to seize whatever assets that this particular country has. So again, we're anti-imperialist. Imperialism is a cultural, economic, political, and military domination of a people, country, and or nation by another. We deal with colonialism, so we're definitely against colonialism. Think about the situation that many African peoples found themselves in prior to, say, the anti-colonial movements of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Many African people throughout the continent of Africa and throughout the African diaspora were colonies. And so we had colonized African people all throughout the continent of Africa. We had colonized African people throughout the African diaspora. And so when we look at the situation here within the United States of America, we define the 45 to 50 million Black people living here as a colony within the United States. So we look at neocolonialism, whereas imperialism grants symbolic political freedom. Well, that same type of phenomena that happens abroad, where symbolic political freedom is granted. So now you have a flag, you have Black leaders, you have some Black police officers, and the white people who used to be directly over you have been removed or replaced. And now the people who govern you look like you, they're your people, but they don't represent your people's collective interests. That's neocolonialism. So what we argue from the NAIP is that we have neocolonialism here within the United States because we have literally thousands of Black elected officials and Black appointed officials, and our material conditions haven't really reflected that in terms of they have been able to replace the white faces that used to oppress us directly with Black and brown faces. But we don't see a material change in the conditions of the Black community that is commensurate with that type of symbolic leadership. So we've even had a Black president, and even having a Black president didn't really result in a significant material change in the conditions of Black people as a whole. So when we see these type of situations, whether it's somewhere else or it's here within the United States, it's what we call neocolonialism. And oftentimes what neocolonial leaders will do, they will basically fight hard to defend and to protect white supremacy for economic reasons and for their own political goals. And it's easier for them to do that because they look like the people who are being oppressed. They look like the colonized. They're the people that we went to school with. They're the people that we played ball with. They're the people that we dated. In some instances, they're folks within our own family, right? But they represent the forces of neocolonialism. Their job is to make sure that there's no substantial change or revolution. Their job is to make sure that the economic, political, and social interests of white supremacy remain protected and intact. And if they have to do that, if white supremacy has to do that, if capitalism has to do that by placing and promoting a Black face to control the Black masses of people, then that's what they do. And here within the United States of America, we see that neocolonialism doesn't just have a Black face. Neocolonialism nowadays will have a brown face. Neocolonialism will be a woman. Neocolonialism will be someone from the LGBTQ community. Neocolonialism could be someone from the Islamic community. So neocolonialism here within the United States takes on different shapes and forms, but in terms of its content and in terms of its purpose, it doesn't change. The purpose is still to maintain white supremacy and economic injustice, i.e. capitalism at home and imperialism abroad. We're a mass-based political party. We are a revolutionary political party rooted among the diverse masses of Black or New African people residing here within the United States. Party members are not required to adhere to any singular culture, ideology, religion, or philosophy. Party members are required to actively support the national platform and leadership. Party members are also required to actively support their local agendas and leadership. So let's go back to the first point. We are a revolutionary political party. We are advocates of radical and revolutionary transformation, right? We are not the radical wing of the Democratic Party. We are not the liberal progressive wing of the Democratic Party. We are not the liberal progressive wing of the Libertarians or anyone else. We are a revolutionary political party, okay? We believe in revolutionary and radical change. And we recognize as such that we are rooted among diverse masses of New African or Black people. So when we came here to this country and voluntarily some centuries ago, we did not all come from the same tribes. We did not share the same ethnic backgrounds. We didn't have the same religion. We didn't worship the same gods. But we were all put together, and through the process of what we went through, we've developed and emerged as a distinct group of people here within the United States of America. So we recognize our historical diversity and we celebrate it. And we also recognize that that diversity is not static, that that diversity has continued to develop over the years. Many of us are rooted from the Black South. Some of us come from the islands. Some of us come, more recently from the continent. Some of us come from various parts of the African diaspora. So we are very diverse people. Today, as centuries ago, we don't all worship the same God. Some of us don't believe in God at all. Some of us are Muslims, some are Christians, some are Yoruba, some are Hebrew. Whatever your religion is, it's fine. So that's why we say, again, we are rooted among the diverse masses of Black or New African people residing here within the United States. Party members are not required to adhere to any singular culture, ideology, religion, or philosophy. If you lean more towards Marxist-Leninism, that's fine. If you lean a little bit more towards Maoism, that's fine too. If you call yourself a Pan-Africanist, we got space for you. If you call yourself a Black nationalist, we got space for you too, right? So we don't say that in order to join the NAIP, you have to be a dogmatic adherent to any one particular political ideology. So we just don't believe that, and that's based on experience. We don't think that works well when you're trying to build a mass-based political party. But you are required to actively support the national platform and your leadership, and you are required to actively support the local agendas as well as the local leadership. The major influences for the NAIP have been Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, what we call SNCC, which depending on which time in history you want to read or study, could be the Student National Coordinating Committee or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The Black Panther Party, we talk about the Black Panther Party that was founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, October of 1966, but we also recognize the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was a political organization that utilized the Black Panther symbol, and that was commonly referred to as the Black Panther Party, which, by the way, Bobby Seale actually had to write and get permission from Lowndes County before they could officially use that Black Panther logo. And it was Emory Douglas who really perfected it and expanded it and helped to promote it as the official symbol of the Black Panther Party, or the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, as it had been originally called. Then later on, they dropped it for self-defense part, and they were just known as the Black Panther Party. And last but not least, the Republic of New Africa. We owe a great debt to the Republic of New Africa because they gave us a very firm and historically sound political identity as New Africans. And so we owe a very large debt to the Republic of New Africa and the work that they've done. So as we normally would do this PE class, at this point we would stop, we would have discussion, and we would ask, questions like, which are the three main characteristics of the NAIP? What type of political party are we? When was the NAIP started? And what historic individuals and organizations have had a major influence in developing the party? And so you can take a look at this for yourself, those who are on the webinar, and you can answer these questions for yourself based on what I presented so far. And if I haven't presented it clearly, so you can answer these questions when it's time for us to have our Q&A session here today. I hope you will bring these questions up again and we can answer them.
Actually, if are we done with the part of the philosophy and platform?
No, we're not.
Okay. All right, let's moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So going on again, we talk about being a New African. So this is why we use the term. We say we originated from the many tribes, nations, ethnicities, and religions throughout the African continent. We are united through the common experiences of capture, enslavement, resistance, and survival. We are connected to the contiguous states and territories of the southern United States, and we are shaped and molded over centuries of oppression and struggle. So let's go through these quickly. I mentioned before, we all didn't come from the same tribes. We all weren't from the same ethnic background. We didn't all worship the same gods. So we originated from the many tribes, nations, ethnicities, and religions throughout the African continent. We are united through the common experiences of not just the capture and enslavement, but the fact that we resisted and we have been able to survive. And we are connected to the contiguous states. Now, contiguous is just a fancy word that means connected, right? Like the borders are connected, the rivers are connected, the land is connected, there's natural borders, there's political borders, whatever. But we are connected to the contiguous states and territories of the southern United States. The vast majority of Black folks in this country have their origins in the South. Just to illustrate, most people on this particular webinar, if I could see you, or if you could raise your hands, how many of you have parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents who come from the South, right? The majority of hands will go up. There you go. And so the second largest number of our people come from the islands, right? A lot of our people come from the islands. They came in the early part of the 20th century. We had a lot of great thinkers, a lot of great radical militant activists who came from the islands, right? And so those are two of the largest groups that make up our nation. And so we say we are connected to the contiguous states and territories of the southern United States. And last but not least, we are shaped and molded over centuries of oppression and struggle. So again, we didn't all belong to the same tribe. We didn't all come from the same ethnic background. We didn't all worship the same gods, but all of us have been subject to enslavement, to resistance. We've had to experience the horrors of slavery. We had to deal with Jim Crow. We had to deal with mass incarceration. We've had to deal with just white supremacy, period. And so through that process, it's shaped and molded us into a very unique people here within the borders of the United States of America. Red, black, and green. This is the flag that we've embraced in terms of the red, black, and green. This is the flag of Black freedom and liberation that was first put out by our brother Marcus Garvey and his group, the UNIA. And so we think it's most appropriate that we adopt it as well. The Black Panther, again, the Black Panther Party, whether we talk about the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or we talk about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. That group has had a tremendous amount of influence on the shaping and development of our party, which is one of the main reasons that we've decided to embrace the Black Panther. again, as part of our official logo. Politics. So we define politics as the struggle concerning the acquisition and distribution of power and resources. And let me repeat that again. We define politics as the struggle concerning the acquisition and distribution of power and resources. Politics is more than just walking into a booth, pushing the button, or writing something on a piece of paper, or pulling down a lever. We say that everything is political. Our lives are shaped and influenced by politics. Where we are born, where we go to school, our neighborhood, our social, as well as our economic status. Everything is political. Just to illustrate, how the police come to your home is political. If you have a certain social economic status, if you are a certain color, then perhaps when the cops come to your home looking for someone or just asking a few questions, perhaps they'll knock on the door. But in other situations, the cops will just kick your door down. That's political. Whether or not your garbage or trash gets picked up on a regular basis, that's political. Whether or not your streets are clean, that is political. Everything is political. Whether or not your children receive a quality education is also political. Whether or not the school that your children go to has the most up-to-date facilities and technology, that is also political. So everything is political. So when people say, well, brother, I don't do politics, and I just laugh. I say, well, you don't have to do politics because politics is going to always do you, right? So if you pay taxes, whether you own a business or not, or if you work for someone and you paying taxes, that is political. So why would you say that I don't do politics, but you continue to pay taxes, right? That's basic premise for revolution. That's taxation without representation. But in your particular situation, and when I say your particular situation, I'm talking about those people who say, well, brother, I don't deal with anything political. I'm saying, why would you put yourself in that type of space where you say, I don't do anything political, but you continue to support somebody else's political agenda with your tax dollars? And you purposely and voluntarily withdraw yourself from any type of discussion in terms of how your money is going to be used. Whether your money is going to be used locally to clean your street, whether it's going to be used locally to pick up your trash and garbage, whether it's going to be used locally to determine how the police knock on your door, whether it's going to be used statewide to determine whether there's going to be some type of environmental justice or lack of environmental justice in your particular city, whether it's going to be used nationally to determine whether or not your money is going to be used to promote imperialistic wars and wars of aggression, right? So you don't have to do politics. Politics is 24/7. It's going to always do you, voluntarily and involuntarily. So we say the time is now. We say that both mainstream political parties have failed to address the plight of Black or New African oppression within the context of white supremacy and economic injustice. Both Democrats and Republicans are parties of white supremacy. We currently have thousands of Black elected and appointed public officials, but still no justice. Now, keep in mind, this was put together some years ago, but it still holds true to this very day. In light of the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, now we see politicians of all hues and colors scrambling about, trying to come up with some type of programs, right, that can address issues like police accountability, right? But these people have been in office, many of them, for years. They didn't just get elected to office. They weren't just appointed to office. They've been in office for years and years. But now all of a sudden, they're woke. They've awakened. And now they realize that there's systemic oppression, to kind of use their phrase, right? Well, there's systemic, no, let me take that back. They don't even call it oppression. They say there's systemic racism. And so now that they've awakened to what they define as systemic racism, now all these public officials and politicians are scrambling about, trying to get ahead of the people so they can craft some type of legislation that they think is going to basically satisfy portions of the community and hopefully in the long run, lull the people back to sleep again. So we say that the time is now. Both mainstream political parties have failed the Black community. If you look at it from like an historical vantage point, the Republican Party failed the Black community after the period known as Black Reconstruction. And the Democratic Party, they've been failing the Black community since the passage of the great civil rights bills and legislations of 64, 65, and 68. So it's been just a history of failure, just a history to live up to the promises and live up to the expectations of some type of justice, collective justice for Black people. So this is the reason that we decided it was important to venture out and start our own independent Black political party. Oh, again, this would be the overall discussion period if this was a regular PE class, and we would ask people, what do we mean when we use the term New African? What individual and group first introduced the red, black, and green logo, and what does it symbolize? What Black or New African groups first used the Black Panther as their political logo? And how do we define politics and what is meant by the term everything is political? And why was the NAIP started? And what does proportionate mean? And we would want people to give examples. Even though we haven't talked about that yet, this is kind of something we threw out there. We wanted to kind of get people to thinking about some things outside of what was presented thus far. We want freedom. So right now we're going to start to deal with the planks of the party. So we say we want freedom. We want the power to determine the destiny of our families, neighborhoods, and communities. We want the power to determine the form, the type, and the function of all the institutions that impact our lives. For example, businesses, schools, as well as the police. We want freedom from poverty, ignorance, racism, white supremacy, homelessness, social disease, and unmitigated state violence. Now, the term unmitigated basically means that there's no end, there's no checkpoint, there's no stopping. And so that's what we see as Black folk in this country, right? Unmitigated state violence. And state violence is organized violence, right? That is perpetuated or that is used as an instrument of organized political body. And the organized political body, or the state for us, is our city, our county, our state, and our federal government. So we get unmitigated state violence, whether it's the local police, whether it's the county police, or if you are dealing with the county prisons, whether it's the state police, or whether it's the FBI on the federal level, or federal marshals, whoever. Black folks are always subject to unmitigated state violence. And now we get subject to not just the state violence, we get subject to violence that oftentimes is protected by the state, like white vigilante groups, white militia, white supremacist groups. So we want freedom from all of that. We want the freedom from the poverty, the ignorance, the racism, the white supremacy, the homelessness, the social disease, and the unchecked or unmitigated state violence. We believe in the abolition and dismantling of white supremacy. Now, I'm going point by point, plank by plank over our national platform. See, today, a lot of people are very cavalier in using the term white supremacy, right? Oftentimes, they use white supremacy and racism interchangeably, and they're not the same thing, or at least according to our definition. So we define white supremacy as the structures, the systems, and institutions which legitimize, empower, and perpetuate ideas, ideals, and practices of white racial superiority. Racism, on the other hand, is an attitude, a belief, and behavioral predisposition that is based on notions of racial superiority and or inferiority. The racism of whites is only significant because of white supremacy. And that's the thing that I think we need to recognize. The racism of white people is only significant because of white supremacy. White supremacy gives it what? Just gives the structures, the systems, and the institutions. It gives them the power. It gives them legitimacy, and it helps to perpetuate those racist ideas, right? So our battle is not so much against individual racism, right? Our battle should always be focused on dismantling the systems, the structures, and the institutions which give that racism, individual racism or collective racism, power. And we define that as white supremacy. We have to fight hard to dismantle white supremacy. You know, nowadays, people will say, you know, Black people can't be racist. Or they'll say, well, people of color can't be racist. You know, you can only be racist if you got power. That's not true. You could be racist as all outdoors and be powerless as well. There's racism that goes on amongst and between people of color. That's why I really appreciate some of the younger people today, because they get much more, you know, specific. They say anti-Black racism. That's being much more specific. Anti-Black racism. A person who is Asian can be racist. A person who's Black can be racist. A person who's Latino or Latinx can be racist. If you ever been to prison, you know this to be true. You know that if you've ever been to prison, especially if you venture out to prison, say like in the Southwest, the Midwest, and on the West Coast, where when you walk into the yard somewhere, you deal, or if you dealt with federal prisons, you could be from the East Coast, but say you've been to some federal prisons. And so, you know, you come across cats, man, from different ethnic backgrounds and different races. And they don't all get along just because they people of color. And they be like expressing racism amongst themselves. And sometimes they bang on each other. It gets real crazy sometimes. That's real. We have to deal with those conflicts and contradictions. We can't sweep them under the rug with this mantra of, well, you know, Black people can't be racist. Black people can be racist too. Our racism doesn't have any power. If our racism had power, if it was institutionalized, if it was systemic, then people would be talking about we have to abolish Black supremacy. If the racism of Latinx people was institutionalized, right? If it was systematized, then the call would be abolishing Latinx supremacy. So we got to understand that whole dynamic. When people say, I'm fighting against racism, I'm like, well, good luck with that. Because if you're fighting to dismantle the individual racism, if you're fighting to dismantle the individual attitude, belief, and behavioral predisposition of a person or group of people, you will be fighting that battle until the day you die. And you can pass that baton on to your children and to your grandchildren and to their great-great-grandchildren, perhaps. But if you're fighting against white supremacy, and if your battle is to dismantle the structures, systems, and institutions which legitimize, empower, and perpetuate those ideas and practices of white racial superiority, then victory is on the horizon. We want reparations. You know, reparations is due to us, and we should rightfully claim it. I'll just give three general reasons why we deserve reparations, just based on history. We're talking about slavery, roughly from 1619 to 1865. We could talk about the state-sanctioned terrorism. This is in response to the period called Reconstruction or Black Reconstructions, the state-sanctioned terrorism that took place roughly, say, between 1877 all the way up into 1965. We talk about the state-sanctioned terrorism. We talk about things like the murder of Emmett Till. We talk about the numerous attacks against civil rights leaders. We talk about civil rights leaders who were assassinated and murdered, who had their homes blown up, oftentimes at the hands of the local politicians. Either local politicians or local police folks participated in it directly, or they knew of it and they did nothing to stop it, and they did nothing to bring those parties to justice who were responsible for it, right? That's state-sanctioned terrorism. Remember, we talked about the state being organized political forces, same people that you vote for, same people who collect your tax revenues, right? Same people who tell you when to do this and when to do that. Those organized forces are the state, whether it's your local government, your county government, your government of your particular state, whether it's Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, California, so forth and so on. And then the federal government, which is the governmental entity that oversees all of it. So all of those particular layers of state have at some point or another sanctioned terrorism against Black people. And Jim Crow, which is roughly, we define Jim Crow as roughly the period between 1896 up into 1965. And some people rightfully could argue that Jim Crow existed before 1896, but we use 1896 as a definitive year for legal reasons, because it was in 1896 that the landmark US Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, came out that basically said that separate but equal was okay. And it became the official law of the land. Now we recognize that even before then, Black folk have been discriminated against, separate but unequal. And but it was only after the Supreme Court decision that it became the law of the land. Again, sanctioned by the state, sanctioned by the government. And then we use 1965 as the official end year, only because we had the Civil Rights Bills of 1964 and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We probably could extend it out even more to 1968 because there was the Housing Act that was passed in 1968, but that was passed, literally that was passed about 2 weeks after Dr. King was assassinated. Dr. King was assassinated April the 4th of 1968. I think the Housing Rights Bill was passed about 2 weeks after his death or 3 weeks after his death. Once again, history should always be instructive. Look at what happened after Dr. King was murdered, after Dr. King was assassinated. Over 100 cities went up in flames. Public officials, politicians were scrambling, trying to find some answers to kind of keep the flames out and trying to find some ways to appease the Black community. And so on the heels of Dr. King's murder, we get the last major civil rights bill, which was the housing bill. And so again, that was a reaction to the murder of Dr. King and the fact that Black folks in this country were engaging in a massive rebellion and revolt. It was so bad. I remember because I was a teenager. And I remember it was so bad that in Washington, D.C., they actually called out the army to protect Washington, D.C., because they thought Black folks was going to storm the White House and literally kill Johnson. It was really that rough. So history should always be instructive. For the young folks, don't be fooled by what you see happening today. Don't be fooled by the scurry of public officials, Black, white, brown, male, female, LGBTQ, Muslim, non-Muslim. Don't be fooled by them scrambling all around trying to come up with all these bills and all these so-called progressive pieces of legislation. Unless they're talking about abolishing white supremacy, getting rid of predatory capitalism, unless they're talking about freedom for political prisoners, unless they're talking about amnesty for the formerly incarcerated, unless they're talking about real structural systemic change, all they're trying to do now is hold down the fort and maintain white supremacy and maintain economic injustice and placate those people who are pissed off and those young folks in the street who are on the verge of a serious, not so much a rebellion, but perhaps even a revolution. So all they're doing now is trying to placate everybody, keep everything okay, and defend and maintain the American, empire. Political prisoners. We want freedom for all political prisoners, especially those of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, Leonard Peltier for the American Indian Movement, the Anti-Imperialist Movement, Allies and Comrades, and all politicized prisoners as well. So the Black Panther Party, BLA, we still have comrades who've been incarcerated now, some almost 50 years. Leonard Peltier from the American, Indian Movement, or AIM, a staunch comrade and supporter who's also been in prison now. I think Leonard Peltier has been in prison for about 35, 40 years now. And then the Anti-Imperialist Movement, Allies and Comrades, the people who supported the Black Panther Party, supported the Black Liberation Army, right? And they didn't just support them with words or rhetoric, they supported them through their actions and deeds, right? They also stood up against American imperialism. This was during the heyday of the anti-war movement. Those people have been incarcerated for the last 30, 35, 40, going on 50 years. We need to recognize those brothers and sisters. And they're not African, they're not Black, right? We need to recognize those people, white folks, man, who stood front and center, who sacrificed everything, right? Who got called all types of names, nigger lovers and everything else, right? And the forces of imperialism, the forces of capitalism, the forces of white supremacy, they made them pay for their support of Black and brown people's right to self-determine and be free. They made them pay, right? They put them in prison too. And they've been in prison 35, 40 years. We need to recognize them. And then we need to recognize all the politicized prisons. We're talking about the people who, they may have been involved in petty street crimes. They may have been involved in gang stuff. but they got busted, they went to prison, and they woke up. And they made a serious commitment to change, not just change themselves, but to change, hopefully to change other prisoners around them, and to challenge the prison authorities for the right to be treated more humanely. So we have those politicized prisons, you know, the people who've taken up the example of Malcolm X and taken up the example of George Jackson as well. Discussion: how do we define freedom? Is there a difference between racism and white supremacy? If so, what is the difference? What are reparations? And should Blacks or should New Africans receive reparations for slavery? If so, why? Are reparations due for anything else? If so, please explain. And what are political prisoners, and why do we support them and demand their release? Proportional representation, y'all. Real basic and fundamental. We say proportional representation. The United States of America has 50 governors. In the House of Representatives, they have 435 members, and the U.S. Senate has 100 members. The U.S. Senate is the most powerful legislative body in the country, has 100 members. So let's look at it for what it is. There's 50 governors within the United States of America. How many Black governors do we have? None. House of Representatives, there's 435 members. I'm not sure how many are Black. I know the Congressional Black Caucus, for the most part, has been ineffective in terms of standing up for Black people. It too has become a reactionary vehicle supporting white supremacy. That's not to condemn every last member, because you do have a few members of the Congressional Black Caucus who stand up, but the vast majority, they don't. They just fold, and they especially fold on issues of foreign policy, right? So they may speak out against racism at home. When it comes to imperialism abroad, they usually sign off like all the other members of Congress, and they give the okay for the United States to invade countries around the world and to drone people and to kill people and to steal their natural resources. So much for the Congressional Black Caucus. The U.S. Senate, again, is the most powerful legislative body in the country. Each member serves at least 6 years. It has 100 members. How many Black senators do we have? We have 3. We have Cory Booker from New Jersey. We have Kamala Harris from California. And we have the gentleman from South Carolina whose name I cannot recall at this moment. So out of 100 senators, we have 3 who are Black. In 2013, the Black population was 45 million, approximately 14.2% of the US total population. But this is according to the 2013 US Census Bureau estimate, that there were 45 million Black folks here in the United States, meaning that 14.1% of the total American population of 316 at that time was Black. This would include those who identify as Black only and as Black in combination with another race. The Black only category by itself totaled 41.6 million, or 13.1% of the US total population. Now, again, this is the 2013 US Census estimate. So last but not least, judicial, out of federal judgeships, there are 874 federal judges appointed. I don't know how many are Black. The reason this is so important, we talk about proportional representation, is because we think that as Black people, we should have proportional representation politically as well as judicially, and as well as economically, and we'll talk about that too. But if we represent anywhere from, say, 13 to 15% of the US population, we should have 13 to 15% of those 50 governors, which means that at all times there would be somewhere maybe about 7 to 8 Black governors in this country. In terms of the House of Representatives, the same thing. Those of you at home, you can work out the math. The US Senate, we got 3 Black senators. If we had a system based on proportional representation, and if we represent 13 to 15%, we would always have 13 to 15 Black US senators. That gives us a lot of leverage politically. Now, of course, we would have to talk about the system for those senators being selected and being voted in, right? But certainly we would want people to represent, we would want to elect people or select people who represented our best collective interests, not the interests of the rich, the wealthy, and the bourgeoisie, or the super duper corporate people. Just people who are willing to represent the interests of Black people, regular Black people, working class, low income, poor, middle income, wannabe middle income Black people, or middle class Black people, regular Black folks. Same thing with the federal judgeships. 874 federal judges. I wonder how many are Black. Those of you at home, you can do the research and do the math. Let me know what you come up with. The war on drugs and mass incarceration, again, proportional representation will certainly have an impact on this too. The war on drugs is but an extension of COINTELPRO, the type of efforts to control, criminalize, and contain Black folks and other people of color, as well as dissidents. Like the war on drugs, the mass incarceration phenomena is a tool used to maintain white supremacy and economic injustice. Jobs and economic development. We believe in a comprehensive King Malcolm Chavez plan to revitalize urban centers throughout the United States. Proportional economic participation. And I'm gonna come back to that. Someone had raised a question, well, what do you mean by King Malcolm Chavez? They know Martin King, they know Malcolm X. Who is Chavez? Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez was a labor leader and organizer who really helped to organize migrant workers, Mexican, Latino, Asian migrant workers. And when I say we, the original Black Panther Party from the West Coast had a real strong working alliance supporting that particular movement, the farm workers movement. And so we honor him as well. We think it's very important that whatever we come up with, it needs to benefit not just us, but it needs to benefit our historic friends and allies as well. Proportional economic participation, for example, if Blacks or New Africans are 30% of the population, then we should get a minimum 30% of all government contracts. Now, I use the 30% because I was referencing the city population of the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But whatever your city, whatever your county, whatever your state, you do the math at home. If you live in a city where Black folks are 30% of the city's population, then you should demand that you get 30% of all the contracts from your city. Not just construction contracts, but professional contracts as well, right? Oftentimes we ignore the professional contracts. When I say professional contracts, I'm talking about the contracts that deal with engineering, accounting, things like that, okay? So this just to give you like a general idea of what we should be fighting for and advocating for as members of the NAIP. We need to be organizing our people to fight these type of battles. If we live in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, Chicago, Houston, wherever we are, whatever the population is of Black people, we should get proportionately, right, a certain amount of contracts and benefits based on what? Based on our numbers and based on the fact that we too pay taxes. Now, if they tell us we ain't got to pay taxes no more, then we can take that money and we could collectively put our stuff together and do our own system for economic development. But as long as we are obligated through force of law to pay taxes, we need to fight and organize and demand that we be represented proportionately in terms of opportunities for economic development. And not just opportunities. Let me take that back. Not an opportunity. We want to make sure that we get what we should get based on our numbers. If we're 30%, we want 30% all the contracts. If we're 15%, we want 15% all the contracts. So this would be the normal discussion period. What are the numbers and percentages of Blacks or New Africans who live in your city, your county, and your state? And you need to ask yourself these questions. How many Black folks, how many Black US senators and governors are there? Explain proportional political representation and why it is important. What is the war on drugs and how is it connected to mass incarceration? What was COINTELPRO and how is it connected to the war on drugs? Oh, I'm sorry. What was COINTELPRO and how is it connected to the war on drugs and mass incarceration? And what are the numbers and percentages of Blacks or New Africans in your city, county, or state who have government jobs or government contracts? And explain proportional economic participation and why it too is so important. For the formerly incarcerated and convicted, we demand general amnesty. We demand a restoration of all human and civil rights. And we want to examine and remove oppressive collateral consequences and barriers to their personal redemption, reform, and rehabilitation. So we talk about collateral consequences. This has been talked about before. We mean, for example, you're a formerly incarcerated, convicted person, certain jobs you no longer can apply for, or if you go to apply for just any job, if you have to fill out that box that says, do you have a conviction? Have you been incarcerated? You fill it out, you're automatically disqualified for any consideration for that job. There's a group that I belong to called Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted People. We have a movement. You'll see that reference there, the FICPM. We added a couple of letters in there to include family. So I think now it's the FICPF. Stands for Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted Peoples and Families Movement. But you can check it out, read about it. Those of you who are formerly incarcerated or convicted people, if you have folks, if you're not, but you have family members and friends who are, this is very important information. And this too is part of the battle that we as members of the NAIP should be taking up within our respective cities, counties, and states. Education, our areas of concern are financing, curriculum, personnel, method. We look at the phenomenon of school consolidations and closings. So these are the areas of concern. The models that we promote, public school, community-based schools, home schools, charter schools, technical and trade schools. In other words, we take nothing off the table. You know, yes, we think that teachers are underpaid, and yes, we think that teachers are under-respected, but we also realize that public schools and education within the United States of America have been very problematic for Black children. And that's not to say that teachers don't put their best foot forward. Many of them do. There's some teachers who don't do too much of anything. They just go and collect the paycheck. I've seen them. I've seen teachers who, when the bell rings for the final hour or the final class at school, they beat the kids outside. They in the parking lot, they done gas up their car and they driving up the street, right? Their children don't go to public schools. Their children go to private schools, right? So, but you know, we're not talking about those type of teachers. You know, we're talking about, and we want to lift up the teachers who are really committed to educating the children under the most stressful situations. Nevertheless, we don't take anything off the table. We think that if parents decide to homeschool their children, that needs to be supported. If parents decide to send their children to a charter school, that too needs to be supported. It should be left up to the parents to make a final decision, and the parents should have choices, and the choices should be financed and funded by the people, and period. Like, we shouldn't say, well, the state dollars or the city dollars just go to the public school. They should go to any school that's going to help Black children. Any school that's going to uplift Black children deserves support. So if it's a community-based school, if it's a home school, if it's a charter school, technical trade school, they all deserve support. They all deserve financial and economic support. Wherever Black children are being taught and educated, we must support it. Now, saying all of that, in light of what's been happening with COVID-19, many of our children are going to be homeschooled by default. And I say by default because their parents oftentimes have not been prepared to be homeschool teachers and instructors. But this is what many parents are being forced to do. So we need to support that. We also need to look into the safety of our children as far as the possibilities of returning back to the traditional school setting, you know, the school building, what that is going to look like because of COVID-19. But first and foremost, we should value the education and safety of our children, and which means we should not let educators, teachers unions, politicians, or anyone else push our children back into the traditional school setting without, first of all, guaranteeing that the formatting, the spacing, and the structure is going to be safe enough for our children to return. And so please keep that in mind. There's going to be a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion in the next few weeks as summer comes to an end about what we're going to be doing with our children as far as schools and education. We call for the creation of the National Civilian Police Review Board. Now keep in mind, people are now starting to say, oh yeah, we need to do this and do this about the police. Well, the NAIP, we put this stuff out here a long time ago. We called for the formation of a National Civilian Police Review Board, empowered to investigate all police-involved shootings and killings, empowered to subpoena and prosecute all police officers involved, empowered to especially invoke such oversight and authority in regards to jurisdictions that have histories of police brutality and terror, such as Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Dallas, Memphis, and now Ferguson, Missouri. And so we could add some more cities to that. At the time that we put this together, it was Ferguson. So we can add some more, you know, with that type of history. We could talk about St. Paul, Minneapolis. We can now include places like the spot in Kentucky, you know, where where Sister Breonna Taylor was murdered by the cops down there. So again, a National Civilian Police Review Board. This is not the answer to all of it, but we think it can help. Discussion part, what is community control of the police? Why is it important? What are some key aspects of the National Civilian Police Review Board? What is the school to prison pipeline? What are some key areas of concern and models of Black New African education? What are collateral consequences of being convicted and or incarcerated? Name a few. Healthcare. We believe in free and we demand free and universal healthcare for all. Black New African people continue to suffer disproportionately from what we define as socially constructed and reinforced diseases, such as substance abuse, high blood pressure, diabetes, and post-traumatic stress syndrome. The environment, we keep it real simple: clean air, clean water, healthy food, and environmental justice. Clean water, clean air, healthy food, and environmental justice. Stop dumping stuff in the hood all the time. The waste materials and all that stuff. They find Black communities and neighborhoods, low income, working class, and they create dump sites, all that toxic stuff. Healthy food. We have communities and neighborhoods where they have no healthy grocery stores. They got all fast food restaurants and little, stop and shop type of joints that sell a whole bunch of processed and bad food. Clean water. This is so important. The brothers and sisters and people in Flint, Michigan are still struggling around the issues of clean water and clean air. And here in Pittsburgh, we struggle with both. We struggle with clean water. You look at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority and some of the debacles that we had to deal with them, everything from bad water, bad pipes, to gauges that are supposed to determine how much you owe in terms of your water bill. That was just all messed up. So people were getting water bills like 10 times the amount of what they should be receiving because the machinery, the technology was just goofed up. And certainly here in Western Pennsylvania, and I would imagine in other parts of the country, the issue around clean air. The air here in Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Allegheny County was just terrible. I mean, literally. I mean, you could put something out, and if you didn't drink it right away, you lift it back up to your mouth again. Years ago, and they have a film on the top of it because there had been so much environmental pollution because of the steel industry, and you didn't have the type of environmental standards that were needed to protect the air and to protect the water, which meant to protect the people. Why? Because capitalism is always seeking to increase its profit margin. And so in pursuit of profits, it was like, well, clean air, clean water, be damned. People be damned. We're just trying to make some more money. So we demand, in terms of environmental stuff, clean air, clean water, healthy food, and environmental justice. Define free and universal healthcare. This is part of the discussion. How does culture contribute to disease and illness? Think about that. How does culture contribute to disease and illness? And what do we mean by socially constructed and reinforced disease? What is preventive health and medicine? What is the relationship between clean air, water, food, and health? And what is environmental justice? Give us a few examples. Housing. We demand safe and affordable housing. We want community control of any development and not gentrification. Universal debt relief. We want debt relief for all people making $250,000 or less, right? So many people throughout the United States are overwhelmed by unreasonable debt, particularly bad mortgages and student loans. What does housing look like in your community? This is a discussion part again. What does housing look like in your community? What is safe and affordable housing? What does it look like? What should it look like? And what is gentrification? What is universal debt relief? How is it relevant to Black New African freedom? Are you or others that you know carrying a lot of debt, such as mortgages, student loans, credit cards, and medical bills? And last but not least, national plebiscite. National plebiscite, a vote by Black or New African people concerning our decisive and political relationship to the United States, dealing with issues of self or group determination, autonomy, and sovereignty. And this national plebiscite, the national vote, will be supervised by the UN, will be supervised by the United Nations. Discussion. What is a plebiscite? What is the UN? And why should Black people petition and present their issues, I can't see the entire thing, but our issues to the UN. Have previous black or new African leaders petitioned the UN concerning the conditions of our people? What is the current, and this is very important, I want you to pay attention to this. What is the current political relationship of Blacks or new Africans with the United States? Are we full citizens? Are we domestic colonial subjects? Are we a non-sovereign nation? Are we some of the above, all of the above, or none of the above? What is self or group determination? And what is sovereignty and what is autonomy? So that's the end of the presentation as far as the platform and program. And I think now, Brian, if you can correct me, I think now what we take, is this break time or do we?
Yeah, this is a question and answer.
This question and answer?
Yeah, and then a break time right after.
Okay. All right, so, all right. Question and answers. So what do I need to do, Brian? Do I go to what?
I requested any questions and answers to be put into the chat. So let's see if we have any anyone that posts questions. As of now, we hadn't gotten any questions, but
Okay.
we did get some responses to your question about the proportional representation of the judges.
So if you could read some of the stuff that you got, I can't see any of them.
Yeah, so looks like for instance, across all Article 3 U.S. District Courts and the U.S. Court of Appeals, people of color make up just 20% of all sitting judges and 27% of active judges. And all African Americans comprise 10% of sitting judges and 13% of active judges.
Okay, so this is U.S. Court of Appeals
and the U.S. District Courts.
U.S. District Court. So that's that's the federal systems. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think about a conversation I had with a group of people up in Ferguson, Missouri. This was last year, and this was during this is the anniversary around the murder of Mike Brown. And so I went to St. Louis, Missouri, and I went to Ferguson, Missouri. So St. Louis is the city, and Ferguson, as many of you know, is a town or city outside of St. Louis. It's in the county. It's in St. Louis County. So I went to St. Louis because, as a member of the Black is Back Coalition, we had a conference that weekend, and I was scheduled to do a presentation. And so I did the presentation as a member of the Black is Back Coalition, in which, by the way, the party, we're an organizational member of the Black is Back Coalition. And I also sit on the steering committee for the Black is Back Coalition. And so I stayed the weekend. I stayed several days. And most of the time I was there, I was involved with the community of Ferguson and the people throughout the area. Because that was the weekend anniversary regarding the murder of Mike Brown. And it also involved some people gathering concerning the issue of reparations. So I had a chance to talk with some of the people up in Ferguson. And I remember, you know, we were all sitting down in a church. We were eating dinner. And this one woman, this was deep. She told me that she never realized that the Black people who lived in Ferguson were the actual numerical majority until after they saw it on CNN. She had been living there all her life. And she said that white supremacy was so dominant. The presence of white authority was so profound and so dominant that the majority of Black people there thought that they were the actual numerical minority. Because you had a white mayor, you had a white police chief. I think out of, how many police officers did they have? I think they had 50, say about 55 police officers. And out of 55 police officers, I think 2 were Black. So you had a Black mayor, you had a Black police chief. The city council was all, I'm sorry, you had a white mayor, you had a white police chief. Out of 55 cops, only I think 2 or 3 were Black. All the others were white. You had an all-white city council. The superintendent of schools was white. So even though this was a township, a borough, where Black folks were clearly in the majority. I mean, I think in Ferguson, and somebody could do the research, those of you who are watching or listening, I think at that time, Black folks in Ferguson had to be anywhere between 70 to 85% of the population. I mean, people were telling me they didn't even know it. They didn't know that they were the majority, because all of their lives, they looked around, all they saw was white people in power, white people in charge. So again, those are the kind of things that we need to speak to as far as why we believe in proportional representation, right?
Right.
People need to be able to see themselves. And if you don't see yourselves, especially when you're in a situation where you're being oppressed, you don't see yourself, and it's always being reinforced that you don't matter, that you're less than, that you don't really count, that your subjugation is just the natural way things are supposed to be. Well, you know, we have to push back against that. We have to push back against that. But I just found that amazing when I was sitting down there talking with the people up in Ferguson, how many people said that until they saw on CNN, until they saw the report on CNN that Ferguson was a Black majority, they never knew it. They never knew it.
Right. There's actually a question that came in on the chat. As you stated, doing things locally, how would we start to get people to follow locally? I believe there's strength in numbers.
Okay. Okay, could you repeat that again?
Oh, sure. So the question was, you stated that doing things locally, or you mentioned about how doing things locally, how would we start to get people to follow locally? And to build, I believe that and they made the comment, I believe there's strength in numbers.
Well, I think the biggest struggle now is to convince people that there are choices, there are options, right? A lot of our people still think that the only choice, the only option they have is to belong to one of the 2 mainstream political parties. And a lot of people still think that the only options that they have as far as policy is to embrace the policies that are being promoted by the representatives of the 2 mainstream political parties. And it's just very problematic. It is a real struggle to get Black people and to get other people as well to move beyond the notion of what I call blind loyalty to the Democratic Party or to the Republican Party, but especially for Black people, the blind sense of loyalty to the Democratic Party. And whenever you present something that's fundamentally different than for them, it's almost as if you're asking them to turn their backs on their parents or their children or something. I mean, it is a struggle. It is a struggle. A lot of Black folks don't realize this, but until the 1960s, the vast majority of Black folks, especially throughout the South, were not Democrats, they were Republicans. Even a lot of the prominent civil rights leadership, they were not Democrats, they were members of the Republican Party. And they were members of the Republican Party because for them, historically, the Republican Party represented the party that was against slavery. And so when their grandparents had a chance, or their great-grandparents had a chance to register to vote or to run for office, they registered and they ran for office as Republicans. So this is a recent phenomenon when you look at the collective history or the long-term history of Black folks as far as politics. This whole blind loyalty to the Democratic Party is relatively recent, but it's firmly entrenched. It's firmly entrenched. I have to remind people that whatever debt we owe to Lyndon Johnson, well, whatever debt we owe to John F. Kennedy and to Lyndon Johnson in terms of civil rights bills and legislation has been repaid 1,000 times over. It's time for us to move on, right? And it's just very difficult for people to see that. Part of that difficulty is that we have political leaders and we have social leaders, mostly our ministers, our Christian ministers, and some of our Muslim ministers too, and imams. They always push that notion that you have to be Democrat, you have to be Democrat, you have to be Democrat. And so, you know, if you're sitting or kneeling in the pulpit and you hear this coming from your spiritual leadership, do you feel inclined, well, this is the only way to go? This is the way that God would have me go, so that's the way I'm gonna go. Even though, you know, I'm certain that whatever God that you believe in would not encourage you to stay shackled, bound, and continue to be oppressed, even by people who look like you. So, yeah, it's going to be a struggle to try to get our people to move beyond that. I agree. It's going to be a struggle. But I think what we can do wherever we live, we can continue to try to build relationships with people and try to organize and work with people around the issues that matter to them. So if the issue is dealing with police accountability, then we need to work and organize with people around those issues. A housing issue, mass incarceration, whatever the issues are, we need to continue to work and organize with the people, right? Because again, leadership comes from the people. Leadership doesn't come from the top. Leadership stuff that you see that's supposed to be leadership coming from the top is an imposition. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. So, you know, that's what I would offer.
Okay. And then there was also a comment that came in that the statistic is that there are 3 Black U.S. senators and 54 Black U.S. representatives. So out of 435 House of Representatives, there are 54 that are Black, which is about 12%.
Oh, okay. So this might be the most, at least in terms of proportional political representation, the U.S. House of Representatives might be the closest to what we advocate at this point. But even with the numbers, we still have to look at the politics, right? Because as I said earlier, the Congressional Black Caucus doesn't really do well when it comes to being a strong advocate on behalf of Black interests. I'm saying the collective Black interests. The Congressional Black Caucus oftentimes reacts. So the Congressional Black Caucus, or the CBC, right now they've been scrambling around and they've presented some things to Congress as far as police accountability. But that's a reaction to the rebellion, right? That's not them, that's not them, for example, demonstrating true leadership, right? That's them coming from the rear and not coming from amongst the people to lead in the front. So, you know, we have to question that. And then again, I would encourage everyone to look at the Congressional Black Caucus's positions around foreign policy. And their foreign policy positions say quite a bit. But if you look at the Democratic Party, you know, I would offer the same critique. Look at the Democratic Party in terms of their foreign policy position, right? It's basically the same as the Republicans. The Democratic Party's position around foreign policy, or let me even be much more specific, Barack Obama's position and his practice around foreign policy initiatives, basically the same as George Bush the first and George Bush the second, right? Not too much variation there, all right? Domestic policy wise, the Democrats can push some things that people would see as progressive or liberal. They're not fundamentally change makers, but they could be looked upon as somewhat progressive or liberal, but they're just enough to to keep people placated and to keep people relatively passive, right? So it's not enough to really move the needle and satisfy your needs, but it's just enough to keep you away from possibly just like tearing stuff up or calling for the complete end of all this madness. So even when you look at something that we've supported, like $15 an hour, well, $15 an hour at one point was a radical proposition. But today, $15 an hour is kind of like mute, because in most places around this country, $15 an hour is not going to help you. It's not going to really satisfy you economically because of the state of this economy, right? But at one point, that was a radical call, $15 an hour. Working people, at least $15 an hour. And in some places around the country, it still could make a difference, okay? In different places in the South, where unionization has really been suppressed, where wages have been suppressed, you know, people who call and who could get $15 an hour, that's a major step up. But for a lot of other places, $15 an hour just won't cut it. But within the liberal confines of the Democratic Party, for many of them, that really means something. And so they'll jump in front of that and try to take control of it and act as if it came from them. It didn't come from them, it came from the people. It came from people who wanted something better. It came from people who helped to organize those people, union organizers. It came from students, right? It came from professionals who, you know, say, for example, adjunct professors from different colleges and universities. It came from all those type of people. It didn't come from professional politicians, and it definitely didn't come from the ruling class within the Democratic Party elite.
Okay, just want to, we're approaching 2:00, so the next item on the agenda was the break and then the code of conduct.
Okay, so can we take a break for what, 5 minutes? Is that okay? How long you want to break?
I don't know. I'm thinking almost since it's 2:00, maybe we should just continue on so that we can wrap it up.
Okay, well, can I take a 4-minute break then? Is that okay? It's about.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so the code of conduct is next?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, I can see some of this stuff, and I'm gonna take me a little break, a few minutes if it's okay. Okay, y'all. I guess we should.
We can put it on the
Yeah,
card.
next is the code of conduct. We can pick up there.
Pick it up from the code of conduct. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Just give me a moment. I'm gonna pull up a screen from our website, and I want to share that with the viewing and with the listening audience as well. Brian, let me ask you a question. Are people still able to see the agenda for today's webinar?
No, it's not up currently.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to double check. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to deal with the code of conduct and some other things in terms of organization. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, give me a moment.
Right now it's the website chapter development.
Okay, great. Does it have state chapters or organizing committees?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, folks, thank you very much for your patience. I needed to take just a few minutes away. If you go to our website under membership and organization and scroll and deal with chapter development, you'll see some things here about the different state chapters that we have organized through Facebook. And you could click on one of these and you could go to the Facebook page and you could actually find people from that particular state who are members or supporters of the party. Now, let me explain something about membership within the party, because we have different levels and types of members. We have some people who are just members of the party through social media. So they go to Facebook, they see some information about the party, they decide they like it, they go to their particular Facebook page for their state, they like it, and they support it. There's some people who actually join the party through what we call the membership and organization page on Facebook. Now, I do believe that today, this particular webinar is being broadcast live through our membership and organization page on Facebook. So we have people who go to the membership and organization page and they decide to join the party that way. And then some people are actually drafted, like their friends and family members will suggest that they be clicked on to be part of the party through the membership and organization Facebook page. That is okay, but what we decided to do is that for those people who are drafted, like somebody recommends you, we want you to answer those questions before we actually decide to enter you into the membership and organization page on Facebook. And the reason why is because we don't want anybody to wind up on the page because your friend or your family member thought that this was something that you should be about or that you would be interested, but you yourself did not express your interest, or your willingness to join. So if you don't answer those questions, your name or your recommendation will just sit on our membership page for a certain amount of time until such time as we decide to delete it. So if you haven't answered those questions,
about starting a party over in New Jersey.
if someone is not on mute, you need to be on mute because I can hear you in the background.
Well, we need a party. We need a party over there. We'll come out and support. We said we'll come out there and do.
I can hear somebody talking. I don't know who it is, but you need to put yourself on mute. So again, if you join the party through Facebook, the membership and organization page, that's fine. But if you've been recommended to join the party, but you haven't answered those questions and indicated that you yourself want to be involved, we will not admit you. So I just want to make you aware of that. And anybody who's made any recommendations, and if your folks are just sitting on our page because they haven't been activated as members, that is the reason why. So I would suggest that you go back to those people, speak with them, and find out, indeed, are they interested? And if they are interested, they need to go to the Facebook page. They need to answer the questions, and they themselves need to say whether or not they want to join this party. So again, we get the people who join the party that way. Now, we encourage those people to go to our website and to fill out the membership form and application. That is how you become an official member of record. Your membership form and application is in our file, and you are an official member when you fill out that membership form. And let me see if I can pull that up. This is what it looks like. Can everyone see this? Brian, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is what it looks like. This is the membership form. And as you can see, it's very simple. Now, here's the thing. Some people have said they tried to submit the form and it didn't go through. That's because if you look, you'll see where you have the red asterisks. Those are areas that have to be filled out. If you don't fill those areas out and you go to submit your form or your application, it won't be accepted. So if you look at the membership form, the address, excuse me, the name, the address, the city, your county, very important, your state, your zip code, an email, are you a registered voter, your community, your neighborhood, very important. So when we ask the question about, well, what is your community and what is your neighborhood? And some people are confused about that, but understand, so I'm gonna try to clarify it the best way that I can. I use an example. I'll use my own example. So for me, if you were to ask me, well, what is your community? Well, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right? I live in a certain part of Pittsburgh, which is called the North Side. So my community is the North Side. Somebody says, well, what's your neighborhood? Well, the neighborhood I live in is called Manchester. So my community is the North Side. My neighborhood is Manchester. Now, a long time ago, when I was growing up, I lived in West Philadelphia. So somebody would have asked me the same question. But what is your community? Well, my community is West Philadelphia. But what is my neighborhood? Well, my neighborhood was called Mantua. Street name used to be called the Bottom or the Black Bottom. So my community would be West Philly. My neighborhood would be Mantua. Today, my community is the North Side. My neighborhood is Manchester. So just to give people some clarification. And why is that important? Because we want people to organize in your communities and in your neighborhoods. Why do we ask the questions about not just your city, but your county? Because oftentimes, as a political party, we're going to be recognized and organizing on a county level. So the county that you live in is real important. And I know this sounds crazy, but a lot of our people don't even know what county they live in. They know what city they live in, but they don't know what county they live in. A lot of people don't even know that they may have county political representation. Here in our county, which is called Allegheny County, Pittsburgh is the county seat. Now, when we use the term county seat, for those who don't know, the county seat is the most dominant city within the county, right? It's the place where the county records and the county offices are kept. So Pittsburgh is the county seat for Allegheny County. But when we go to run for office, we run for office through Allegheny County's Bureau of Elections. And what I'm saying, I would think that any of you from wherever you come from, it's the same thing wherever you are, right? So if you're up in Illinois and you're running for office in Chicago, you have to go to Cook County Board of Elections or Bureau of Elections to do what you need to do in order to register as a member of the party or to run, right, under the party's banner. So that's why it's so important that we know not just what city you come from, but what county you come from, and what community you claim, and what neighborhood you claim, because we want you to organize community by community and neighborhood by neighborhood. So I just want to take some time to answer that. Also looking over the membership app. If you don't fill out where it says check all that interests you. Just you got to check 1, 2. You got to check something. What areas interest you? Elections, voter education, affordable housing, community defense, the newsletter, police brutality, guard liberation school, whatever it is. You got to check one of them. If you don't check any of those, your membership application is not going to be accepted. And the membership dues are $5 per month, which is $60 a year. And you don't have to pay them right away. We give you an option, but you have to check it. If you don't check the option, your membership application will not be accepted. So I just want to go through that real quick. People can understand it. If you have problems with your membership application, that is the reason why. So
And
again,
I think the next was the code of conduct.
yeah, you know, we're going to get to that, but I'm kind of scrolling through some things that I thought were really important for people to, you know, pick up on. So we were talking about the different forms of membership. Again, you can join the party on Facebook, through Facebook, by going to the membership organization page and joining that way. But you are not a party member of record that way. The only way you become a party member of record is when you actually fill out the membership form and application and turn it in. When you turn that in, we have a digital and we have a hard copy record of your membership. And that's what we go by, right? Even though we recognize all the people on Facebook, whether you on the membership and organization page or you just signed up and liked one of the state chapters, that's fine too. So if you want to get a sense of who in your particular state might be supporting the party, you go to the website, you look under chapter development, you look under state chapters and organizing committees, and you can just quickly hit any of these and they will take you to the Facebook page of your state. Now there's a couple of states that are relatively new. We haven't included them on this list, so we have to update it. I believe that's Florida and Tennessee. So we haven't included Florida and Tennessee yet. And we don't have a lot of people, from those states, but we need to include the state of Florida and the state of Tennessee. So we have about 30 something states across the country who have members and supporters of the party, or people who've indicated they're interested in developing chapters or organizing committee within their particular state. All right, so now we want to go on to the code of conduct. So this is the code of conduct for the NAIP. And it's not very complicated, it's very basic. Number one is listen to the people attentively. There is no change without them. 2, be courteous and respectful, especially to youth and elders. And 3, protect and defend one another and your communities. 4, don't make promises that you can't keep. Your word is bond. 5, be honest. Do not lie, cheat, or steal from the people. 6, party members must study and learn the NAIP philosophy and platform. And 7, depending on their schedule and availability, all party members must participate in political education and community organizing classes. And listen, that's very important. I know everybody's schedule is different. You know, we have 15, I do believe 15 different modules, somewhere between 13 and 15 different modules for political education. I went through the first one this morning, but we have like 12 to 14 more. And it's important that you go through each module. It's important that you participate as much as you possibly can. 8, learn and practice criticism/self-criticism. Understand that it's important that we learn how to be self-critical, that we learn how to criticize ourselves, that we learn how to take responsibility for our faults and shortcomings, that it's not always the other person or other people. Sometimes it's us, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. But we have to learn how to take responsibility for our faults, for our shortcomings, and for our failures, right? Because all of those are things that we can learn from. And even if we feel ashamed, which is nothing wrong with feeling ashamed from time to time, but you can still learn during that process. You should not let the fact that you've been shamed stop you from picking yourself up and learning from the experience and moving forward, and being willing to teach it to others so they don't make the same mistakes and errors. But we have to learn how to practice criticism, self-criticism. This is a major flaw within our movement. It's a major flaw throughout our communities. Oftentimes we are resistant to having any type of constructive conversation that is in any shape, form, or fashion critical, because we've developed very fragile egos about who we are, who we think we are, or who we want people to think we are. And we're just not open to the possibilities that we made a mistake, we made an error. And if you're not open to that, then you can't grow, and we can't grow. So we have to be open to that. Criticism, self-criticism is very important. It keeps us strong. It keeps us as an organization sharp, and it keeps our membership strong and sharp as well. Follow your national and local leadership. Focus on principle and not personality. Now, this is another problem that we have within the Black community, within the New African community. Oftentimes we get caught up around personality and not so much principle. So it's like, well, I don't like her, or I don't like him, so I'm not going to listen to anything they have to say, even though it might be correct. Or I don't like him, so I'm not going to work with him, even though he's a good worker, even though he's diligent, even though he's disciplined, even though he gets things done. I'm still not going to work with this dude because I don't like this dude, right? We got to move beyond that type of stuff, and it's difficult for us to do, especially us as a collective people, an oppressed group of people. Oftentimes, oppressed people, we have a tendency to cling on to stuff that is really counter to our best interests. But in order for us to survive psychologically, we continue to cling on to certain ways of thinking and certain ways of behaving that keep us feeling a certain way about ourselves, even though in the long run it's against our best interests. So focus on principle and not personality. If you are dealing with someone within the party who perhaps is not your favorite person, perhaps you don't like him or you don't like her, try to move beyond that. Try to do some self-examination. Again, going back to criticism, self-criticism. Why don't you like this person? What is it about this person? Is it the way they wear their hair? Is it how they wear their clothes? Did they ever do something to you personally or to someone you know or family member? Have they been dishonest, right? Have they violated maybe other parts of the code of conduct that you know of? And maybe you haven't brought it to their attention, which is another issue. We have to learn how to talk about these kind of things, and we have to bring these things out so we can deal with them above board so they don't become festering sores within our organization. So again, focus on principle and not personality. 10, very important, do not use drugs, alcohol, and/or intoxicants while representing the NAIP or doing party work. You can do a lot of stuff while you high, but please do not try to represent our party while you are high or intoxicated. Take a break. Let somebody else do the job. Go home, sleep it off, or go wherever you go and party your heart out. But do not use drugs, alcohol, or intoxicants while representing the NAIP or doing party work. We cannot dictate how people live their lives and how they personally or socially recreate. If your individual recreation involves that, then we can only suggest that you maintain discipline when it's time for you to represent the NAIP, and we would hope that you would be disciplined when it's time for you to deal with your family and deal with your friends. But again, do not use drugs, alcohol, or intoxicants while representing the NAIP or doing the work of the party. 11, work hard to get things done. Talk is cheap. Black folks, and that includes me too, we love to talk. We talk. We got a whole bunch of ideas about what we should do and what we could do. But after we finish talking and after we give all the what we should have done and what we could have done, oftentimes that's where it begins and that's where it ends. We don't put in the work. And then we look at our enemies and adversaries and we wonder why and how they're able to do the things that they do. Well, one of the reasons is because they move beyond rhetoric. They're not caught up the way that we are, oftentimes on just the spoken word, right? They focus on like transforming the words into action. And that is a process, you know, transforming the rhetoric into some actionable items, and then connecting all those actionable items together until it actually becomes work, something that's actually been done and accomplished based on the spoken word that preceded it. So again, work hard to get things done. Talk is cheap. Develop and maintain a moral compass in all that you do, which is number 12. Very important. So when we say develop and maintain a moral compass in all that you do, if you're like a religious person, if you're a spiritual person, right, use your religion and use your spirituality as a compass to help you to do the work that you do, to engage with the people, to engage with the community. If you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're Hebrew, if you're Yoruba, you know, there's certain things that should serve as a guideline for how you engage with people, right? If you call yourself, for example, a very strict, say, you know, materialist, or a very strict dialectical materialist, then still, even with that, there's a certain set of ethics that should guide your behavior, right? So whatever you adhere to that gives you the regular guidelines for how you live your life, we want you to apply those standards to how you operate within this party. So we're not saying that you have to carry yourself like a Christian, a Muslim, or Hebrew, or Yoruba, or anything that you're not. But we're saying that if you belong to something like that, or if you adhere to things like that, then as you do the work of the NAIP, use that as a moral compass in your interactions with the people and in your interactions with other party members. And so that can help you to adhere to 11 and 10 and 9 and 8 and 7 and so forth and so on as the NAIP's code of conduct. So Brian, that's the membership code of conduct. What else is on the agenda, and is it time for questions and answers, or what's happening?
Yeah, we do have, I think, a portion for question and answers here, but after that, the next item on the agenda is the campaigns.
Okay, so let's deal with some questions and answers.
Let me just double check what questions we had come in.
And if you had any questions from before that weren't answered, I'd like to hear those too, and we can respond.
Yeah, there was a question about how their membership can be confirmed.
Okay.
I know that's something that you can take care of, right?
Right, right. So in the past, what we've done is whenever we received a membership form and application that was completed, you know, people would get a phone call. Sometimes people would get a letter. In the past, we used to send a membership packet. Now, I'm not sure we'll be able to do that again, but we used to send a membership packet with a button or a sticker and a letter of welcome. We may be able to get back into that again. But mostly, once your membership application has been completed and we receive it, you'll get a phone call. Most of the time, you get a phone call from me or maybe some other member of the party just to talk with you and get a sense of who you are, and try to get a better sense of how you can fit in. And if you checked off one or more of those boxes, to see how that can connect to maybe a campaign that we're doing here, or a campaign that, depending on where you live, you could start, you could organize and develop within your respective city. So okay. I hope that answered the question. Any other questions from before that were not answered? Say when we did the presentation about the platforming program?
There was a question regarding police representation. Hold on, let me try to see if I can phrase it right. I guess the question is in terms of how do we get the demographics of police to match the demographics of the neighborhoods that they police?
Oh, okay. Now that is a very good question. I couldn't tell you how. I couldn't tell you how. I can only suggest that we would have to advocate for what we call community control of the police. Now, I know that right now there's a lot of talk about defunding the police, and I think people have done a very good job in explaining in general what defunding the police would involve. Basically, I would sum it up as a transfer of assets and monies and resources that normally would be allocated to police departments, that they would be reconfigured and they would be reassigned to the people, namely for social programs, human development programs, and things of that nature, which we support that. But we think ultimately it's about community control of the police. If you look at our platform, that is part of our national platform. We call for the creation of a National Civilian Police Review Board and community control of the police. Now, community control of the police is something that during the most recent history of the Black Liberation Movement was articulated by the Black Panther Party over 50 years ago. The Black Panther Party also called for community control of the police, and it helped to organize along with others different campaigns in various cities, pushing this whole thing around community control of the police, that the community, the people, should be the ultimate authority as far as who gets hired, who gets fired, and what any disciplinary measures would be when it comes to police officers. And that police officers ideally should be members of that particular community. They should come from that community, right? So they would have direct accountability to the people that they police, as opposed to a situation, for example, in many cities where police officers, they police one group of people who they have no attachment to. So just to illustrate, here within the city of Pittsburgh, for years, the city of Pittsburgh had a rule that police officers had to live within the city of Pittsburgh. Well, even then, certain police officers were able to get around that rule because they would use two addresses. They would have a city of Pittsburgh address, perhaps their old address, perhaps their parents' address, or some relative's address, but they live outside of the city. They would live somewhere else. But at least there was a law, or at least there was a rule that said they had to live within the city. Well, now that's no longer the case. There was a new ruling which states that the city of Pittsburgh police officers no longer have to live within the city of Pittsburgh. So we get police who oftentimes don't reflect the ethnicity or the race of the people who they are policing, okay, but now who also don't even have to live amongst those people. So when you don't have to live amongst those people, say for example, if you're married or you have children, not only don't you have to live amongst the people that you police, but if you have children, your children don't go to school with them at all, right? Your spouse never interacts with any other spouses from the communities that you police at all, right? So that furthers the distance, which furthers the sense of accountability between the police forces and the people who they are supposed to police. And so that's why we advocate community control of the police. Ultimately, the people should be the final decision makers regarding the hiring, the firing, and the discipline of any police, period. I hope that I was able to help to answer the question.
There was a kind of like a related question as well, because there was, I guess there's city council meetings that are taking place to defund the police in Pittsburgh. And the question was, does it make a difference that that I live in the borough of Swissvale?
Okay, so again, we have to understand the different levels of government that we are living under. So if you live in a borough, say you live in the borough of Swissvale, then when it comes to defunding the police, then that needs to be taken up on two different levels. It needs to be taken up on a borough level, and then it needs to be taken up on a county level, because Swissvale is a borough within Allegheny County. So that issue needs to be addressed within the borough of Swissvale when you have your meetings, right? And then it needs to be addressed when Allegheny County has its meetings, right? And now if you live within the city of Pittsburgh, then it needs to be addressed when city council has its meetings, and it could be addressed again when Allegheny Council, the county council, has its meetings. So it depends on where you live. So based on where you live, that will determine who has the jurisdiction to address the issue and where your time and energy should be directed. You know, one of the things that we used to do years ago, which was an error, which was a mistake, just say, for example, someone would get beat up by the cops, or someone would get shot, or worst case situation, murdered by the cops. So we would be in an uproar and we would demand police accountability. And say, for example, the person got killed by a cop within the city, right? Well, we would demand police accountability. So we march on City Hall, and you know, we would want to call out the mayor, or we want to call out somebody sitting on the city council, right? Well, all of that wasn't bad, but we were not focused, and we didn't identify the correct targets. So if this person got beat up or assaulted or shot or murdered by a city police officer, then we should have focused on, we could have focused on the mayor, we could have focused on the chief of police, or in Pittsburgh, for example, they have the public safety director. So the public safety director oversees the police, the EMT, as well as the fire department. So we could have focused on the public safety director, we could have focused on the chief of police, we could have focused on the mayor, and we could have got real specific and identified who on Pittsburgh City Council, for example, was the chairperson for the public safety committee, because they control the budget, they control the money, so forth and so on. So we had to learn from experience how to become more focused and how to identify targets for protests, and not just shoot off at the mouth, or not just let our emotions just send us anywhere, or let people point us anywhere. So again, this is so important as you organize, as you develop your chapters and your organizing committees, when it's time to engage in protest demonstration, whether it's physical protest demonstration, whether it's online, whether it's letter writing, whatever it is, telephone, identify your targets. Be much more specific. Think about the outcomes that you desire. Don't be reactionary. Don't let people step in and mislead you and misguide you. Some will do it intentionally, and others will do it out of ignorance and naivete. So be careful, be thoughtful, be mindful, be deliberate, do your research. Okay, any other questions, Brian?
Yeah, I think that you answered most of the question.
Okay. Any old questions that we need to address as we move on?
No, that was it. That was it.
Okay.
There was a comment about what the party is actually doing to work towards the community control of police.
Okay. Okay.
But I think you had already were mentioning that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let me see what I can come up with quickly. People should still be able to see. Right. So let's talk about campaigns. I don't see the agenda, Brown. So you're going to have to let me know what's the first thing under campaigns.
We have we have the 3 campaigns.
Yeah.
First is the Committee for Civilian Police Review Board, and then we have the second is the New African Workers Union, and last is the People's Campaign for Reparations and Black Self-Determination.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'll start with the Civilian Police Review Boards. So several years ago, we held a series of meetings. Okay, so let me just kind of share this with folks who are looking at the screen. So if you go to our website, look under activities and campaigns. This is just a little rundown of some of the campaigns and activities that we've been involved with for the last several years. And this would give you some context. So several years ago, we became aware of the Fraternal Order of Police. They were having a celebration, a centennial celebration in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, celebrating their 100 years of existence. Now, the Fraternal Order of Police, for those who don't know, it's the FOP is the acronym. So the FOP is the largest police union within the United States. It may actually be the largest police union in the world. The FOP was founded in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania by two Pittsburgh police officers in 1915. So in 2015, the FOP decided that their centennial celebration and conference would be held in their founding city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ironically, they decided to hold their centennial conference and celebration on the same date and weekend as the anniversary of the murder of Mike Brown. So we protested. We got together with other people and we organized a protest. We put together a mobilization, which we call the National Mobilization Against Police Brutality in the FOP. We marched and protested and demonstrated against the FOP. And it ruffled their feathers a little bit. But from there, we also decided that we wanted to maintain this loose coalition called the National Mobilization Against Police Brutality in the FOP. But we also decided that we needed to have some type of civilian police review board for Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. There was a civilian police review board established over 20 years before, just for the city of Pittsburgh. But there had been nothing established for Allegheny County itself. So out of the national mobilization, we in turn decided to organize and put together the Committee for a Civilian Police Review Board. So we started to hold meetings in different places, different venues throughout the county. We held meetings up on the Hill, the North Side, Homewood, East Liberty, and then we started holding meetings out in the Mon Valley in Braddock, at the Braddock Library. And that kind of became our main place where we started to hold our meetings. And this was a process over a few years. Again, it started in 2015. So we were finally able to draft a proposal after having held the different meetings that we had held. We had a pretty decent group of people who were part of this. And we had some support coming from one of the legislators from Allegheny County, DeWitt Walton. And he in turn had been able to get another county councilman to co-sign a proposed piece of legislation. So to make a long story short, the bill was submitted last August, but unfortunately it was voted down by 9-6. So we had to go back to the drawing board again. Now, since then, this is especially true since COVID-19. We have not had a meeting the way we normally would have a meeting. The last meeting we held was in, I think it was March, was the last meeting we held. Or it was February or March was the last meeting we held. So we haven't had a physical meeting since then. But what we've discovered is that some other folks on the Allegheny County Council, namely one of the council persons, Olivia Bennett, along with DeWitt, have pushed for the creation of a civilian police review board as well. And the legislation was reintroduced, but it has not gotten out of committee. It's been in committee, it's been stopped from getting out of committee on 2 different occasions. So that's the situation that we find ourselves in terms of the Civilian Police Review Board for Allegheny County. One of the main issues is the power, the scope of power and authority for this board. As it stands, this board would not have the power or jurisdiction, mandatory power and jurisdiction, rather, over the various police departments of Allegheny County. Allegheny County has a dubious distinction of having more municipalities or more governments than any county within the United States of America. In Allegheny County, it has approximately 130 different municipalities, which means that 130 different townships, boroughs, and cities of various classifications. In the state of Pennsylvania, there's up to, I do believe, cities, classifications, and boroughs. I think there's up to maybe 8 different classifications, depending on the size of the area and the population. So for example, Philadelphia, which is the largest city in Pennsylvania, which also has incorporated the county, which is another reason it's so large and the population is so large. Philadelphia is a Class 1 city. Pittsburgh, which is the second largest city, is a Class 2 city. The classification system, I do believe, goes from 1 throughout 8. And so Allegheny County has more cities, boroughs, townships, and municipalities of various classifications than any other county in this country. They have approximately 130 different municipalities with over 100 different police departments. So the problem with the legislation is, according to state law, right, this particular review board would not have jurisdiction over all these police departments. So we're kind of stuck with that. The state law is going to have to be changed, and it's going to be difficult because in Pennsylvania, the majority of the state House of Representatives in the state Senate are members of the Republican Party. So when you look at the state of Pennsylvania, and it may be like this in other states as well, but in the states of Pennsylvania, you have 2 regions that have the bulk of the Black and brown population. That's basically the most of the Black and brown population is coming from southeastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. And the bulk of the Black population on the other side of the state is coming from southwestern Pennsylvania, and that's the Pittsburgh area. So between those 2 areas, in between those 2 areas, you have a lot of space. You have a lot of space. You have a lot of conservative folks who live there. And you have some spots where you're going to find Black and brown people in Harrisburg, to the northwest in Erie. But you have some other places, it's like rural, it's small, it's suburban, and it's white, and it's middle class, and it's upper class. And their representatives are basically members of the Republican Party. And even those members who are members of the Democratic Party have a tendency to be moderate Democrats. So it's going to be difficult to come up with a piece of legislation that's going to give the power and jurisdiction for the county to be able to oversee all of these 100 police departments. Now, certain police departments said they're willing to opt in, but others are saying no. I think in light of the more recent events, since the rebellion, the pushback against the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, that some legislators might be more inclined to give a nod to some basic reform. Others are going to be reactionary and say, hell no, they ain't budging. So we're going to have to see how it turns out. But again, this fight, at least amongst the representatives, Allegheny County, this fight is being taken up by Councilwoman Olivia Bennett and Councilman DeWitt, Walton, and I believe Councilman Klein was also a firm supporter. And we'll just have to see how it turns out. Now, we believe that we need to go ahead and move forward. And while we support that, and we support calls for defunding the police based on our understanding, we ultimately support calls and we believe in community control of the police. But we also think it's important for us to develop our own civilian police review board. It doesn't have to be approved by the county, we can develop a grassroots civilian police review board. And we've came up with a mechanism that we believe we can use to hold police officers accountable when they violate people's rights. That's not something that we can talk about this afternoon, but I just wanted to share that with the group in terms of talking about the detail of the mechanism. We're not going to talk about that this afternoon, but I just wanted to give an overview to the group. The second thing is the New African Workers Union. We started that about 2 years ago, basically because we understood the historical connection between unions and political parties. And we really saw for ourselves, and literally in black and white, the relationship between the Democratic Party and a lot of the unions in our area. Basically, a lot of the unions within our area do not come out to support the Black community, but they want Black faces and bodies to be front and center as they present themselves as progressives and liberals. And they want Black faces to vote for Democratic Party candidates, even though the Democratic Party candidates, at least on the national level and some on the local level, are very weak and very lukewarm when it comes to issues of Black freedom and Black progress. And then the unions themselves are basically ran by white men. We did a little survey and we found out that the vast majority of unions in this country, in terms of the trade unions, are ran by white men, even in cities such as New York, right? And it speaks volumes about the current state of economic affairs with Black people, even pre-COVID-19, that in places where there was all this development going on, you would go from city to city, county to county, and you would see the absence of Black workers. Now, you would see some fluctuations if you went to places like close to Atlanta, or if you went to certain cities in the Southwest, where you might see some Black faces, and certainly you would see a lot more brown faces, right? Latinx people. But in some of these other traditionally Black cities, there's a noticeable absence of Black workers on these construction projects. So again, we decided we need to start our own union, and we need to organize Black workers so Black workers could have an independent voice in what happens on their jobs, and they could have an independent voice that could help them and help us to advocate not just for jobs or better wages or safer working conditions and opportunities, but to advocate for Black self-determination as well. And then last but not least, I think this is probably what might take up a little bit more time, and I'm gonna try to get to it. I'm gonna move this page a little bit. It's the struggle around, or the campaign around reparations and Black self-determination. This are some photos just to, over the years, different campaigns, different work, the things that we've done. Again, I encourage people to go to the website, newafrican.org, check it out for yourself. If you got some money, make a donation. We greatly appreciate it. And more importantly, we need it. But just to give you a sense. So we developed a survey, and it's called the National Survey on Reparations and Black Self-Determination. Kick it in now. So this is one of the tools that we've been using for the last couple of years to collect data as far as people's perspective and opinion about reparations. Again, we thought it was more important to move beyond just the rhetoric and making demands for reparations. We wanted to be able to back our demands up with data. We wanted to be able to say, well, based on the survey and based on the results in the survey, this is what people think. So again, we would encourage anybody who hasn't taken the survey, who's online now, to take the survey. You can go to SurveyMonkey. If you look at the screen, at the top of your screen, you'll see surveymonkey.com/r/R, capital Q, 2, capital M, capital X, capital R2. And that should take you to our survey. You can just go to SurveyMonkey and look for National Survey Reparations and Black Self-Determination. And you'll see the subtitle is an organizing initiative of the New African Independence Party. So we would encourage people to take the national survey. The first page, we ask some, we don't ask questions. We put out some parameters. The purpose of the survey is to gather the information and feedback regarding the public response to the idea, the proposal, and movement to obtain reparations and self-determination for Blacks or New Africans within the United States of America, in particular, those who are descendants of enslaved Africans. And then we talk about reparations, and we define reparations to repair and make amends, a compensation for the effects and impact of slavery, state-sponsored violence, Jim Crow, COINTELPRO, which was United States government-led counterintelligence program to identify, target, assassinate, and incarcerate Black and New African leaders. The war on drugs, another government-led initiative to flood the Black communities with drugs, to target Blacks with disproportionate numbers of arrests, convictions, and longer prison sentences. So we want reparations for all of this. And also we define self-determination, and we use the international laws, and we use international narratives about self-determination. So we define self-determination, the human and international right of a group of people to freely determine and decide its own political and economic relationships, the right to be a nation and determine their own political identity and destiny. So from there, we would encourage people to take the survey. And we start, where do you currently live? What is today's date? And then we have some questions. What do you regard as the 3 most important issues or problems faced by Black people in the United States? How do you define yourself racially or politically? Check all that apply. Black, African American, New African, African, Moor, biracial, multiracial, indigenous, so forth and so on. And again, this is a survey, anybody can take the survey. So this is not a survey that's exclusive to people of African descent. To the best of your knowledge, were either of your parents or grandparents born in the Southern United States? For example, North or South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, Virginia, Maryland, and so forth and so on. You know, based on the presentation from earlier about our platform and philosophy, I'm certain that you can understand why this particular question was made part of the survey and why it's so important to answer this question. And what is your age? So we start from 14 all the way to over 65. We start with 14 because, for example, in many states around the country, and in our state of Pennsylvania, if you're 14 years old, you can get a permit from your school district and you can work. So if you're old enough to work and you're old enough to pay taxes and you're old enough to have a voice in this discussion. And what is your gender, male, female, or non-conforming? How would you define your current status within the United States? You define yourself as a citizen, as a resident, as a New African, as a Moor, or other. So we try to cover all the bases for, how people may define themselves. Based on U.S. history, culture, economics, and politics, do you think Black people within the United States are a distinct group of people or a nation? Yes, no, or maybe. Since it has been over 50 years since the passage of the Civil Rights Bills of 64, 65, and 68, do you think it is time for Blacks in the United States to be headed in another direction politically? And this is not a very long survey, so that was 10. 11, would you support Blacks having political, economic, and judicial power that is proportionate to their numbers? For example, Blacks and New Africans are currently 13 to 15% of the US population. Therefore, they would have 13 to 15% of all US senators, representatives, federal judges, governors, and federal contracts. Do you support reparations for Blacks, New Africans within the United States, specifically those who are descendants of slaves? Number 13, how should reparations be paid? Please check all that apply. Cash, land, benefits, universal debt relief, free school tuition, housing vouchers, income tax exemption, free health insurance, all of the above or none of the above. And the last question, very important. Based on the past and current conditions of Black life in the United States, do you support the creation of an independent Black nation to include all Black people within the United States, but based in the South? And that would mean it would be based in the South, but you don't have to move to the South, but you would still be part of that nation. So it's a 14-question survey that we present. And this is one of our organizing tools, and this is a tool that we've used to gather data and information so we can back up our claims and back up our demands for reparations. And I know it's about time for us to leave and get out of this, and I really appreciate people's time and patience and energy, so I'm not gonna be too much longer. If you can, please take the survey and pass it on to other people and encourage people to take the survey. And I wanna share with you some of the response of people. It's not the most recent numbers, but just to give you a sense of how people see this. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to go to, let me see. Give me a moment. Oh, here we are. So we have a page specifically on our website. We have a page specifically for the People's Campaign for Reparations and Black Self-Determination. And I'm trying to get to that page right now. I just want to share some numbers from the survey, and then we want to close out from there. And move on, answer any questions. So briefly, how we got started with this campaign. During the Marcus Garvey birthday weekend of 2017, the New African Independence Party convened our annual conference. And in response to the conference theme, which, by the way, every year we have a conference called the NAIP Conference, stands for New African Black Unity and Solidarity. A group of people decided to move forward and actually develop and organize a campaign to address the issues of reparations and the need for Black self-determination. And so this kind of runs down our mission. And it says, I hope everyone can see it, our mission is to obtain reparations and self-determination for all Black people in the United States of America. We want reparations for the pain, suffering, enslavement, and economic exploitation of Blacks during the periods of slavery, state-sponsored terrorism, and Jim Crow. We demand the release of all political prisoners who, in response to Jim Crow, white supremacy, and state violence, engaged in organized resistance and were profiled, targeted, and incarcerated. We demand the release of those political prisoners who are and were subject to additional harm, including prolonged solitary confinement and torture for political resistance during their incarceration. All must be released. We seek redress and amnesty regarding the war on drugs. And I'm gonna skim through some stuff because I want to get to the numbers. I'll just skip to 6. It says, United States of America continues to promote and implement policies and practices which render severe harm and oppression to Black people collectively throughout this country. 7, therefore, we are demanding the power to determine what type of future political, economic, and social relationship, if any, we as Blacks, African Americans, New Africans, etc., are to have with these United States of America. We are making the above stated demands on the United States of America, its various municipalities, the federal government, the states, the counties, and the cities, etc., in all businesses, educational institutions, foundations, and individuals who are direct and or identifiable beneficiaries from the horrific enslavement, exploitation, suppression, and oppression of Black people within the United States of America. So please go to this page, check it out for yourself. You can see some of the links. You see our little photo we use as one of our logos, and we say, in parentheses, for our ancestors, our children, and our grandchildren. So what I'd like to do now before we close out this part, and I'd like to answer questions regarding this part, I'd like to deal with the numbers, if I could. Also, you could go on YouTube and check out a couple of videos regarding this particular campaign and why it was important that we connect the call for reparations also with the demand and call for self-determination. So the following is a general, I'll scroll over here. The following is a general update regarding responses to the national survey. We hope to provide updates on a monthly or quarterly basis. We need funds in order to continue its distribution because it costs $37 a month. I just want to let people know that. SurveyMonkey for this type of work is not free. So for here, we had 128 people responding. This is from some time ago. We had 128 respondents from the following states who took the survey: Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan, Maryland, Connecticut, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, DC, Missouri, New Mexico, Maine, Hawaii, California, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Louisiana, South Carolina, Nebraska, North Carolina, Illinois, and Ohio. Once again, we must have data to support our demands. 81% of those surveyed had parents and or grandparents who were born in the Southern US. 83% of those surveyed see Blacks as a distinct group within the United States. 93% of those surveyed think the movement for Black freedom and justice needs to be headed in a different direction. 91% support proportional representation. 95% support reparations. 66% support a comprehensive reparations package that would include land, cash, free healthcare, and free tuition, so forth and so on. Within the above reparations group, 42% of those, now keep this in mind, 66% supported a comprehensive reparations package. Now within that group, 42% favored land and 40% favored cash. And then last but not least, 67% support the creation of an independent Black nation based in the Southern United States. So I'm gonna stop there. I wanna go back and make a couple of comments about membership because I didn't finish that narrative. I talked about the 3 different types of membership, but I only finished talking about 2. When you join on Facebook, it's great. Most importantly, you need to go to the website, fill out the form. But the ultimate membership for us is when you go to your county board of elections and you register as a member of the NAIP. I'm a registered member of the NAIP with the Allegheny County Board of Electors. So that's the ultimate membership. We want to have people who are registered formal members of the party, people who are going to vote and run for office. Now, if you're not ready to do that, that's fine. You're still a member of the party, right? But for those who are going to be voting and running for office, go to your county board of elections and register as a member of the NAIP. When you get your card back, it may come back as NAIP, or it may come back as independent. It's still the same. You can always go online and check and make sure that your registration formally is with the New African Independence Party. That being said, Brother Brian, we're willing to take some questions, and we want to close out and try to keep as close to the schedule as possible.
Yeah, we haven't had any questions come in, so maybe we can give a minute or two for questions, but haven't had any questions come in yet.
Okay. Well, let me say this. We also have, if you go to our website, if you scroll, just about every page on the website is connected to the Rock the Vote platform. So you can actually, if you haven't registered to vote and you plan on voting, right, you could go to the website and register to vote from there as well. Any other questions, any comments before we close out for the day?
We do need donations, if you want to speak on that.
Oh, absolutely. You can speak on it. They could go to the website and they could make a donation. Just go to the donation button that you see. It should be on most of the pages on the website.
Yeah, it's greatly needed, you know, since we are an independent party and we don't get any major funding from all of our funding is independent. So we definitely need all the donations we can get.
All right. Any other closing, any other comments, anything that I need to address, Brother Brian, that you see? Anything that I need to speak on before we close out?
We just encourage people to be as active, to like what they hear, to continue to be active with the party. We do have open positions that we are needing people to fill. And we have the campaigns that we mentioned that we definitely need people to help us with. And as we move forward.
All right. Listen, also, I'd like to make a comment about reparations. Right now, there's a lot of talk about reparations, and in different places around the country, some folks have said, some folks have pointed to legislation that's been proposed and legislation that has been passed as an example of what reparations would look like for Black folks in this country. Let me caution folks. A lot of what's being presented is not reparations, right? It's basically the same type of affirmative action packaging, and it is ineffective in addressing the real issues that impact Black people socially, politically, and economically in this country. Let me just share with people some of the core ingredients of any type of reparational package. It has to involve land. It has to involve money, and if it's reparations that's being made on behalf of people who have been engaged in a protracted struggle or war against the folks who they are seeking reparational justice from, then it also has to involve the automatic release of any incarcerated warriors, soldiers. In our case, it would be our political prisoners. And it also would have to involve general amnesty for those people. And so those are three core components of any type of reparations. So when people say, well, this is reparations, the first questions you need to be asking them is literally, where's my money? Where's my land? And when are my people being released from prison? Just straight up. And if they can't provide that, it's not reparations. What it is just another affirmative action program that is being put together and proposed, especially in light of the recent rebellion, right? As a reaction to the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, right? And so you're going to get a lot of that. You're going to get a lot of people, in a lot of these folks mean well. They're going to say, well, this is reparations. It is not reparations. There's certain things that your government should be doing for you anyway, because it's your government, at least at this stage, it's still your government because you pay taxes to that government and they obligate you to pay taxes to it. And if you don't pay taxes to this government, then you're subject to be penalized, incarcerated, or both. So because they force you to pay taxes, then they're supposed to deliver certain services in exchange for your taxes. So these are things that your government is supposed to do for you. And if they haven't been doing those things for you, and they say, okay, well, we're going to do it for you now, that's still not reparations. Reparations is based on injury and harm that has a legacy and history, and that continues to this very day. And so there's certain injuries and harm that are basically legacies from enslavement and Jim Crow and mass incarceration, right? And then there's harm that continues to this very moment, right? And so the government is supposed to fix what it needs to fix for the moment, but the government still owes you for the things that it did from before. And so that's what reparations is, right? And so three core components of any type of reparational justice or any type of reparations package has to be money, land, and amnesty and freedom, right? If there's no land, if there's no money, and I mean literally land, if there's a piece of legislation that is not going to grant Black people land or sections of land, it's not reparations. If there's a piece of legislation that is literally not going to put money in your pocket, your wallet, or your pocketbook, it's not legislation. If there's something that's being proposed that doesn't include amnesty and release for political prisoners or amnesty for people who've been impacted by the fake phony war on drugs, right? It's not reparations. It's a ploy, it's a plot. The law is all back to sleep. So we need to be very mindful of that. And again, I'm not saying that all these people are bad people, and I'm not saying that all the people who are making these proposals are doing so in bad faith. I think many of them mean well, but they just don't understand what reparations really are. And so we need to couch reparations in the language that nations of people use. And I know that may sound kind of foreign to some folks, but the bottom line is this: Black people are punished collectively and Black people are being oppressed collectively. And so we need to see ourselves as a collective, and we need to see ourselves as a nation. Even though we haven't declared ourselves to be one yet, right? We need to see ourselves as a nation, because the way that white supremacy deals with us, it deals with us as a nation of people who it seeks to continue to oppress and exploit. Any other questions or comments?
No, we don't have any other questions. Yep, that's it.
All right. All right, well, brother, I want to thank you for your time and energy. I really, really appreciate it. Sister Ramona, I know you're somewhere in the mix. I want to thank you for your time and energy. I was hoping we were able to be on Facebook Live. I think we made it. I'm not quite sure. But I want to thank everyone who took the time out of their day to be part of this membership meeting and this webinar. And I hope we were able to share with you some information about the NAIP, who we are, what we represent. We love our people. We love Black people. We love New African people. We love the people in general, right? We believe we have to stand up and fight against oppression and exploitation. And don't be fooled. What we are going through as Black folk is not just discrimination. This is oppression, right? When every move you make and everywhere you turn, you find all these roadblocks based on your skin color or based on your social economic relationship to the system, what we call your class. When you find all these type of roadblocks, you are being oppressed. It's not just a matter of you being discriminated against here and there. So we have a right as human beings to stand up, to organize amongst ourselves, and not just to resist this oppression, but we have a right to declare ourselves as free and independent people. And ultimately, that is the goal of the New African Independence Party. Our goal is not to find ways to accommodate ourselves to white supremacy and economic injustice. Our goal is not to find a soft spot or niche for Black people or certain classes of Black people within the systems of white supremacy and capitalism and imperialism. Our goal is to create a different type of relationship. And that relationship has to be predicated upon self-determination and freedom and liberation for Black people and for all people who are willing to, along with us, engage in this type of movement. We recognize that ours is not the only movement for freedom, right? So we're not chauvinistic in that regard. And we may not necessarily always agree on every point, but we support those who support us. And we love those who love us. And we're willing to stand with those who are willing to stand with us. So that being said, thank you again for your time and energy. Brother Brian, Sister Ramona, thank you both.
Thank you.
All power to the people and free the land.
Power to the people. Free the line.
All power to the people.